want to welcome you into the Lootpress Studios. It is Tuesday. It's Election Day. You're watching the Lootpress Sports Lowdown. I'm your host, Tyler Jackson, the sports editor at Lootpress. Joined as always by Lootpress sports writer Rusty Udy. Rusty, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Trying to wade through the madness right now. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on.
Yeah. I will say, though, went out and voted, and I see you voted as well, and was able to get through that process in 15 minutes, so it seems to be going pretty
fast
smoothly.
too,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the penultimate week of the regular season has passed, and we're getting into the final week, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to recap some of the games that we saw on Friday and what to look for next Friday and some of those matchups as far as the playoff ratings go. And again, a lot of this could go out the window because I'm sure somebody's going to file an injunction this week, or they're going to file one first thing Monday to throw this playoff picture all over the place. But we're going to talk with what we have and what we know for the time being. Talk about state tournament soccer that starts on Thursday and some regional volleyball that we'll have this week. Some historic games that could be taking place. But first thing I want to start off with, and we were talking about it just a minute ago, I want to start with Beckley at Oak Hill. We talked about that was a big game coming in. Could Oak Hill rise to this challenge? It seemed like, throughout the year they kind of skated by, and was this going to be the one where they finally got busted? And you told me after this game, you're like, I no longer doubt Oak Hill. I am fully on that defensive train. And, man, just what a victory. They come into your house, and, it's crazy. Like this time a week ago, we're kind of going into this, and, it's like, what can Oak Hill do during these last 2 weeks? Like, it determines a lot of it. And now it seems like they might be locked into a home playoff game after a big win like that. It just completely changes the complexion of the outlook for this team right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's each week you kind of watch them, and that defense is just, they're hard to explain. I mean, they just don't. They're just blue collar. They're just hard nosed. They don't do anything that wows you outside of just being physical. And that's the key to defense, really. But we've seen Beckley go in and bully teams and push them around, and we kind of wondered, would that happen in this game? And really from the broad standpoint, it was, Oak Hill held more than held their own, really, because, Beckley had plenty of opportunities. They just couldn't cash in, and Oak Hill wouldn't allow them to. So, it was really an impressive performance. It'll be interesting to see how this game goes with Oak Hill when they go to University this weekend or this Friday. But again, you just kind of feel like they're going to figure out how to get it done.
Absolutely. And one of the decisive plays of the game was, it was a 4th and 5. Or a lot of people kind of assumed it was leaned more 4th and 6 there at the end. Yep. And Oak Hill has to punt the ball away. There's under 2 minutes to go. There's probably a hair over a minute. And Oak Hill, Beckley gets flagged for offsides. And, most people on both sides, from what I understand, and you even yourself have talked about, Oak Hill got a very favorable measurement, and I know the Beckley sideline wasn't very happy with that, and I understand that. But I always hold the philosophy that officiating doesn't decide games. You have to adapt to different things. You might be irritated about that one play, but there's still 60 other ones that you could, on defense and offense that you could capitalize on. And that's kind of what it boils down to me. I know that there's going to be a lot put on that one. But, it's 4th down. They're going to punt. Just don't jump there. We've talked about it. Oak Hill has a tendency to try to draw teams off sides. They send their offense on the field often on these 4th down situations to do it. Against Bluefield, it backfired. They got false starts. We talked about it against Princeton. They did it. They were able to extend the drive there. This is one thing that they do. And it's not very specific to Oak Hill, but it's something you have to do. You have to watch the ball and take the game out of the officials' hands. That's one thing that Ryan Davidson, the girls basketball coach at YMU, has always told me. They've gone places where they don't feel that the officiating is the most fair, but they don't complain about it. Their mentality is always, we didn't do a good job of taking the game out of the officials' hands. That's what you have to do. You can't put yourself in that situation to begin with. And, when you're in a one-score game, you have tons of opportunities to change it otherwise and just don't jump. And, I know that might not sit well, but that's just kind of the truth of it. And that's where you have to take accountability on that part, even if the spot was, by most accounts, surprising and wrong, and probably wrong. And when I watched the broadcast of it, even the Oak Hill broadcast, they were kind of like, it doesn't look like they're going to get enough, and then they were shocked that they were going to get enough.
Right.
But you just can't put yourself in that situation.
Yeah, and Oak Hill had really struggled punting the ball. I mean, they had I think a 9-yard punt at one point that set up Beckley's second score. And they'd really struggled, and, you're right. I mean, you just can't give them the opportunity to move that ball forward, because with it only being even if it was just maybe a half a yard or a quarter of a yard, I'm not so sure Oak Hill would have gone for it at that point, because of the struggles they'd had punting. But, that's kind of a different, scenario. But, Beckley had the game, like they wanted it. And, you're right. They just can't jump at that point. You got to be a little more disciplined than that. And I think the problem there was it was just a highly volatile game. There was a lot of emotion on both sides. And, sometimes you just don't think the situation through real well. And, it's unfortunate, there is, that little bit of a stain on the game. But, I mean, we talked before, Beckley had numerous opportunities. They had the ball in plus territory all night, and just really couldn't capitalize like they should have. So, it's unfortunate that call was there, but, you do have to kind of look at yourself as like, what did we not do? And Street said that. He said Oak Hill was the better team that night, So it was unfortunate that people point to that, but it definitely wasn't the factor in the win or the loss.
Yeah, it's tough, because if you told me beforehand, Oak Hill is going to score 19 points, I would probably assume that Beckley would have won. But, Oak Hill's defense just shows up again, and they got to commend the job that Devon Merrigan's done there. We talked about, I remember when I first started Oak Hill, it was the Corey Bass crew and all them. Yep. Oak Hill, because you covered this game, I remember you saying how weird it was. They went to Fayetteville and they lost. And they got off the bus. They were already dressed in their uniforms and everything like that. And keep in mind, Fayetteville only had like 130 kids at this time. Their roster, they maybe had 20 kids, 21 kids on the roster. And, obviously Jordan Dempsey and that crew, they were really good. Oak Hill was still like an 800, 900 kid in enrollment sort of school. They had just dropped from AAA. And, I think their first year back in AA, they were 0-10. And then they struggled, and I think that third year they finally got into the playoffs as a 16 seed or 15 seed and lost to Bluefield. But that just shows how far they come. They struggled in AA, and now they might host the playoff game in AAA. And it's just really incredible to turn it around quite like that.
It's a funny little story too, because Devon's a character. I mean, he really is. I watched him play in high school at Mount Hope, and you won't find somebody that played harder than him. There's no doubt about it. But he's kind of a character when you talk to him. And he said he works up at high school with Coach Arthur, and then he kind of looked around. He's like, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this or not, but we both are there at the school together, and we talk a lot of defense. So we kind of have an edge on defense because we work on it so much, schematically and things like that. And then it's easier to translate that over when they get to practice. So it's just been an amazing year. Every game I've watched them, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but they get the job done. And if you'd have told me that Oak Hill would have been at this point, 8-1, I would say, I don't know about that. But they've proven everybody wrong, And when you basically your one loss is probably going to be the top team in AAA when the playoffs roll around. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. And Devon himself, great defensive player in college. We're talking first team all conference safety. He was. Imagine those like the Cam Chancellor, Troy Polamalu, Brian Dawkins, like a hard hitter that could cover like that. That was the kind of player he was. I had a chance to watch him my first couple of years, and they were special. I want to move on to the game that I covered, West Side at Shady Spring. This one was a 14-14 game with about 9 minutes to go, and then it just changed on one play. West Side's driving. They're in the red zone, about the 17. Jalen Bailey from Shady Spring rips the ball out of the running back's arm and runs it 77 yards out to the 10. And the game just flips like that. Shady Spring scores on the next play. On West Side's next play from scrimmage, Bailey gets an interception, and then Shady scores there afterwards. It puts it up to a 2-score game and kind of puts that thing away. West Side's really struggling right now. They kind of – the Tug Valley game really hurt them because they lost some starters there along the line as well. And that's what you worry about in games like that. And then it kind of translated over to this one. They still struggled to find a running game. I think they ran 20 times for 60 yards, and that's just not a very efficient or productive run game. So they're putting a lot on the passing attack, and when the ball hits the ground, the clock stops, and
Right.
all those different things. So, for Shady, it was a good job to kind of gut this thing out. They had to move some kids around. Caden Helmer, I think, had, twice as many yards rushing and carries as he has all season long because they had to move him from the tight end spot. And, he really benefited. They were able to attack West Side up the middle. And, for Shady, that's the game that you really need. That kind of walks you into the playoffs. And West Side, now you're fighting for your playoff life, which they have a favorable matchup this week, but you're still in a very tough position that you didn't want to be in.
Yeah, it's really tough for West Side because, we felt like they were a playoff team this year, but, kind of like Greenbrier West. I mean, you just can't factor in injuries. You don't know where they're going to come and what positions they're going to come. And about any football coach that you talk to, they just basically talk about luck. You need a bounce. You need guys to stay healthy. And, you lose guys at key spots, that really hurts. And, for Westside kind of to be in the position to, maybe win that game with it being as high as late, outside the heroics of Jalen Bailey, that speaks a lot to, just how good they are, because when you lose what they've lost along the line, I mean, Westside's a double-A school, but they're not like, 50 kids on that roster either, so it's tough. But, whenever you see, big plays coming from Shady and Jalen Bailey being the name that you throw out there,
No
it's just
surprise.
like, there's no shocker.
Yeah. He has a flair for dramatic, just knows when to show up and play well. The thing that does kind of concern me about Shady, just because turnovers aren't sustainable, their defense their team really thrives on getting those turnovers. They're really dependent on forcing turnovers from other teams. And I don't know how much they'll be able to do that against a team like Wheeling Central this week. And then once you get into the playoffs, are you going to be able to force 2 and 3 turnovers and keep yourself on schedule that way? But the thing that I thought, I really liked was their offensive philosophy in that game. They were given the run lanes. They didn't try to throw. Really, most of their throwing attempts, they only threw the ball 9 times. It came with like a 2-minute drive to go in the final 2 minutes of the first half. And, they had some incompletions there, but they weren't really like stubborn or anything. They decided, hey, like these are looks that we're getting, so we're just going to keep going under center. We're going to keep running it. So, a lot of credit to them for being able to stick to that philosophy. Because the one thing I'm sure that people look at when they see, quarterback is the coach's son, they're going to give him every opportunity to throw it, and that's just not going to be the case here. It just seems like they're going to take the opportunities to win football games, and that's exactly what they did Friday night, and it paid off and it worked out. It was very successful for them.
Yeah, I mean, as much as, and you see that a lot on Sunday too. I see teams, run the ball, do really well, then they get down near the goal line and want to start passing it all over the place, and they wind up kicking field goals. You got to take what the defense is giving you, and you've got to be able, if you can do it. What's the old adage? You throw it. 3 things happen and 2 are bad. So just keep on gashing teams.
The 2 other games I want to talk about from this week: Greenbrier West at Midland Trail, Nichols County at Ripley. Real quick, West at Trail. West probably had their playoff hopes completely slammed shut. They're off this week. They're 5-5. I think they come into the week at 18 or 19 in the playoff ratings. This was a result, it didn't surprise me that Midland Trail won. I really thought that West would win, but I'm not shocked Trail won. I'm shocked that they blew West out. That really surprised me. It was so bad that West, which has always sent their stats, did not send them this week. And I asked about them, they're like, I haven't done them yet. And we threw away the sideline ones. It was just one of those. And I can understand the frustrations of that one. And then Nicholas County at Ripley. Colton Nichols County threw a season high 41 times in this game, and part of that, Colton Helms, the quarterback, broke his arm. Some of his family members posted on Facebook, so his season is likely done. I think the hope there is you hope that he can probably get back for baseball season. But that's a tough loss for them to have. They end the season with Pikeview, and with as well coached as they are and the kids they have, they've relied more on Devin Nash at running back. They should be able to. But they've been hit hard by some injuries, and losing Helms is incredibly difficult. You're talking about a kid that's started almost 20 games at quarterback, and that's experience it's hard to replace, especially this late in the season.
Yeah, I'm right with you on the Trail game. I mean, I was just really, when I saw those scores keep coming in, I just was, kind of knocked over by them. But I think Coach Jeremy Moore said it exactly. He's like, this was the team we've been expecting all year. So, and, when you watch them, you definitely can see that capability was there. It's just they were their own worst enemy all the time, constant turnovers and giving teams, positive possessions and things like that. So, it was pretty stirring, that the game was that, big of a blowout. Will McGraw, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, that's...
Interception, 12 tackles on the... So he actually, and I did stats today, he had more yards rushing in this game than I think he's had the entire season.
Yeah.
So,
and that's kind of the back we thought he was going to be. Because he runs hard. When he hits you with a ton of bricks. So, I was a little taken back by the score, but really, like you, I wasn't surprised Trout won the game. As far as what was the other game?
Nicholas County.
The interesting part of that game was, and I've read this just from people's posts, so I can't totally verify it, but they were talking about that he got hit late. And we've talked about this, we've seen a lot of that this year, and more than we need to see. That's a fact. And the fact that he gets hurt on a late hit, I know sometimes that's. Late hits happen, and I don't know the complete circumstances, but it's doubly troubling when it gets hit late, and because the break is bad. I mean, it was a really bad
the X-ray
break.
pictures of it, yeah.
And so he really had to go down in a strange way. You kind of wonder if he was driven to the ground or things like that, because most of the time quarterbacks don't break. You break an arm, you don't break it that severely.
Yeah.
So that's really unfortunate. All injuries are unfortunate. We've really seen some really tough ones this year, but with good kids going down hurt. But unfortunately, it's part of the game. But it's just you just hate that it happens when it should be something that probably shouldn't have happened.
And this kind of goes back to and Princeton folks are probably tired of me harping on it, but this is why you have what happened in the Winfield game. This is why officials have to get games underhand, because things like that happen and the kid can get seriously hurt.
Right.
And I think it happened in Fairmont Senior Bridgeport. Fairmont Seniors, a lot of people have called out some of their behavior. They've had some players ejected, and a player was ejected Friday night for what many consider a late hit or an unnecessary hit.
Right.
And from my understanding, it was that player's second such hit of the season. I did see. If it is the player, I've seen the play before. I think it was against Preston was the last time that he was ejected. But this is the why. This is why we get these sort of deals where the whistles tighten up. When officials feel like they need to control the game, because then you have a situation where if Colton was hit late and it happened after a play like that, now he's just lost his football season, and then we don't even know what's going to happen with baseball.
Right. Yeah, that's a deep, long-term injury. To get back to healthy. It's unfortunate. It did look really rough.
Absolutely. I want to go ahead and move on to some of the matchups we have from this last week, starting off with Thursday night, James Monroe at Bluefield. This is, I'll have this game. And we talked about last week, who would have thought that Bluefield would be in this position? They should be hosting a home playoff game regardless, but this one, I think they can get to 6. I think there's a very, very slim outside shot that they can get to 5, depending on how everything goes. But if they win this, they get to 6, and if you're James Monroe, if you lose, by all likelihood, you're out of the playoffs, which is extremely rough for 6-4. I think James Monroe is one of the best 16 teams in the playoff field. It's just I think the schedule is kind of I think they schedule tough. They've always done a good job, and obviously adding Bluefield being one of the few. Them and Independence are the only AA teams in the area that will have Bluefield. It's just some years you just don't get that extra from them. We talked about they lose to Shady. They just don't get the extra because of Shady's schedule. But, yeah, a lot on the line here for both teams. James Monroe's got to come in ready to play. They're coming off a bye. They had that loss to Petersburg, so they're going to try to get things corrected. Bluefield was able to explode against Giles. They put up over 40 points. Willis Wilson had a nice night rushing for 200 yards. Max Simpson threw for over 200 yards or close to it. Right. So, and we talked about it. They played up a lot of the season, so now when they get to some of the teams that are more AA-ish, then it helps their cause a little bit.
I remember that night, when they played Beckley, and Bluefield looked like a mash unit. They really looked they were beat up. People walking around with ice on their knees and ankles and shoulders wrapped and different things like that. And even at that point, Freddie was really confident that his team could get into playoffs. And it was funny because the thing he said was, "We just have to get in." If we can get in, we think like we can, make some noise and do some stuff. Well, now they're not only going to get in, they're going to be hosting a playoff game now. And, at that point, if you'd have told me that, I would have laughed you out of the building, because I just didn't see that happening. I would probably seen Bluefield making the playoffs because I thought they were pretty good. And you couldn't ask for a better scenario for them. The game's on the carpet there at Mitchell, and that helps their speed, and they can really use that passing game, which they need to use because that's what they're most effective at. So it's kind of hard to believe we're kind of at this point, and really maybe the only game that kind of has a big swing on as far as playoff goes. But the rest of them, teams can move a position or two, but are probably going to stay where they're at as far as being in the playoffs. But this one's big. This one's real big.
Yeah, and one thing I think Bluefield, if they do end up at 6, there's an outside shot. Well, kind of a realistic shot. Independence gets up to 3. So then we could potentially get that, in the second round, depending on if both those teams win. You could end up getting that matchup. But, one thing that stands out to Bluefield for me, if that injunction happens and the ratings points are restored, I think they actually stand to benefit from it a little bit more because Pikeview becomes a AAA, Oak Hill becomes a Quad A.
Right.
So everything kind of works out a little bit more in their favor regardless. Like they're already kind of doing well, but if that injunction happens, it's like, okay, we get Quad A strength of schedule points from Oak Hill. Okay, we get AAA, we get the extra, instead of 6 or, whatever it is, it's 9 for AA, so we get 12 for AAA because we beat Pikeview. So they might be rooting for that because they can move up a little bit more.
Exactly.
Although I don't think they move up enough to get to a top 4 seed, but who knows?
That's it.
A couple other ones: George Washington at Beckley. Beckley, I think, is now 1-10 after 3 consecutive 5-1 starts. They've got to find a way to just turn that around because human nature sets in. It's kind of there in the back of your minds. These kids have been a part of it. They've seen it. And it sets a precedent where it's hard to get excited about some of those starts. And we've seen it before. Beckley's been able to get to this point. I wrote about it, but they were 2-5 a couple years ago when Keaton Cook and Maddox McMillian were their seniors, and they turned it around. They went to South Charleston. They won by 20 points or so. They were able to get into the playoffs. I think that was the first playoff berth of Street Surratt's head coaching career. Yep. And they got GW, and they've been on a bit of a skid against GW, but they have competed against GW in the past. I think when Grant Wells was there, they actually beat them 38-35 or something like that. It was like a 3-point game. So that they've competed with GW, and I think that winning this game isn't so much as important for playoff ratings points as it is just like restoring your confidence.
Right.
Getting that little extra boost before you go into the playoffs because I really think that they need something to go right for them.
Yeah, and it's a tough deal because I'm pretty sure GW is sitting at 8, and they're looking at playing at home or playing on the road kind of with this game. So they're definitely going to come in looking to win that game, and I agree with you. As far as Beckley's it'll maybe change who they play, but you're right. They just need some positive vibes, to feel like they're kind of back where they were before, and because it definitely looks like a totally different team. First half of the season, both second half of the season. So, we'll see how it plays out. But GW's going to come in ready to roll.
Mm-hmm. Meadow Bridge at Craig County, I believe. Montcalm beat Craig County if you want to do the, go through that way. Meadow Bridge stands to actually host a playoff game if they win this one. Caden Sims, I think, has almost twice as many yards as the next leading rusher in the area. He's averaging about 266 a game. He's over 2,000 on the season. Stands a chance. Could happen this game. He has a couple 400-yard rushing performances, but stands a chance of getting to that single-season mark, this week, and obviously things toughen up in the playoffs, especially on who they draw.
Right.
But that's on the line too. But most importantly, for Meadow Bridge, in this game, you're likely hosting the first round of playoffs.
Yeah, that'd be pretty special for that group down there. They talked about this senior group, wanting to get them back into playoffs and have a really good year. And I thought maybe the Clay Battelle game might come back to haunt them a little bit. But even if they play like Meadowbridge has been playing and play Meadowbridge football, there's a pretty good chance they're going to win this game. And, that would be the kind of the icing on the cake was to get to play at home.
Oak Hill at University, we talked about it. Oak Hill wins this one. They should be locked into that 5 seed, which would guarantee them a home game. And I think that it guarantees you, if you're able to win that first game, a more favorable matchup.
Right.
In that 4 seed, it looks like it's probably going to be Hoover. And I know the Hoover contingent is the happiest with me right now just because I think that the 4 teams in AAA, I think Princeton, Fairmont Senior, Bridgeport, and Spring Valley are in a different class. I'll apologize publicly if Hoover beats one of those teams and gets to the state championship game. But as it stands now, I don't see that. So, but if you're Oak Hill, not looking too far ahead, you win this game, you get that 5 seed. If you can get that first round playoff win,
right.
I think that Hoover's probably a little bit more of a favorable matchup. They've seen some, Oak Hill's seen some good teams. Hoover would have a couple ones, and obviously not looking too far down the road. But first off, if you're Oak Hill, you got to go all the way up to Morgantown and take care of business in this one.
Yeah, and University's a better team than their record shows. You start looking at their schedule, and they played some pretty brutal games. So, that's a good football team, and they started out rough, but against some against some tough opponents, and are playing much better, right now. But the whole Hoover thing kind of makes me chuckle a little bit, about putting it up on the bulletin board and different things like that. I mean, come on, man.
Go for it.
I don't get it. I really don't. I mean, why do you need that for motivation? The fact of, you should be able to be motivated, just to go week in and week out. And the bad part of it is it's not like there's malice in it. It's just like this is kind of how we see it.
Objectively, what I see is truth.
Yeah.
And just one other thing I do want to point out with that is, it's not lost on me that they're undefeated and still sitting at 4.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's, you schedule the way you do. I know that conference things and all that, but I do think it matters that, some of these other teams have bigger schools and, they have championship like Bridgeport and Fairmont Senior. Those have been the last 2 dynasties of Class AA. Bridgeport had it for a couple of years, handed it off to Fairmont Senior,
right.
And now, they're in the contention.
And we've seen both of them play.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like, they could compete with quad A schools.
Yeah.
I mean, they're good, and it just.
And Spring Valley, like we've seen them, go through the MSAC and send kids to WBU and play Martinsburg and state championship
and
games.
I think we did the same thing kind of like with West Side and some other teams. It's like, look, your schedule says this, or is that what what your schedule says, or are you going to be, better than that? And until you show you're better than that, then you can't jump out there and say, that's a state championship team or something like that. Now, like you say, they win a game like that, and they're like, oh, okay, they're pretty good.
So Hoover, I like your team. I think you got good players.
They're fun to watch.
I just don't think that they're in the top 4 right now. They could shock me, they could surprise me, but we'll find out on Black Friday.
That's right. That's right.
We'll know our answer by then. Moving on to Parkersburg South at Princeton. Parkersburg South, I think that they're always a dangerous team. Offensively minded. Obviously Princeton went up there and handled them pretty well last year. But South does a lot of good things. They do some things I think that can give Princeton trouble. Like they'll try to move the pocket, they'll try to get it out. Right. They're not going to try to present a lot of opportunities for those pass rushers to get to their quarterback. For Princeton, we're trying to put this thing away. I think that they've kind of moved more into the mentality of they're going to run with Jennings more and use Lowe all over the field. That's what happened last week. Markel Lowe only rushed one time, and it was like on an option pitch for a touchdown. So I think that's kind of become their identity. And I think that's a smart thing to do because I think Markel is a football player in the good terms. I compared him to Christian McCaffrey just because of the way you can use him.
Right.
And I think that versatility is just killer. Like when you can't decide like what he's going to do because he can line up at different spots. It's just so hard to defend. For Princeton, by all means, just by everything I've seen, if they win this game, they should end up with a number 1 seed. And even if there's an injunction, I'd imagine that helps their cause because Oak Hill bumps up to a quad A, Independence bumps up to a triple A. So they get points there from that either way.
Nicholas County too.
Yeah.
Would jump up. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what for Princeton, big game, take care of business, and you're staying at Honeycutt up until then. And getting that 1 seed is so important because, again, you do not want to face Fairmont Senior, Bridgeport, or Spring Valley until you absolutely have to, and that keeps you out of that side of the bracket. And whether or not you like to hear this, Princeton benefited from being on the right side of the bracket last year in the playoffs.
Yeah.
You didn't have to go through Huntington or Martinsburg, or be able to get some upsets where Bridgeport wins and Parkersburg wins, so you get to stay at home and host.
Yeah.
So if you're Princeton, you want to take the path of least resistance, let all those other teams beat up on each other, and then you get the final product on the neutral field on Saturday if you're able to get that far.
And I'm sure that's not lost on, Coach Taylor and the staff, but, Princeton's got a little bit of a different attitude this year. They're not only, it's like sometimes you go into games and you wonder, are they going to be, overlooking teams and things like that. But I don't think this group's like that. I mean, they really go in, almost with an attitude of, we're just going to pound you to death. And so, I mean, I with South, as much as I've always liked their offense, and it's fun to watch. It's kind of all over the place, but I've always thought their defense was a little bit, not so great, and that's going to benefit Princeton, kind of keeping the ball and holding the ball, and I just don't think South can outscore Princeton, and I'm pretty sure South is coming off Spring Mills game. Is that right? I believe they played Spring Mills this week, so
yeah.
That's a tough game that they had to play there, and then got to travel all the way to Princeton, so that's basically 2.5 hour, 3 hour drive. I just think if Princeton does what Princeton does, this one's going to be go Princeton's way.
Yeah, take care of business. Now the next two games here in Raleigh County, Summers County at Independence, Wheeling Central at Shady Spring. In some way, these two games are intertwined. If Independence fans, clutch your pearls. You might want to root for Shady Spring to win this one. Now, there are a couple scenarios. Independence could get as high as a 3 seed, from what I understand, and that has to do with Scott and Williamstown playing each other. And there's a lot of coaches around the state that think that Scott is a better team than Williamstown. And, I could see it. I've seen Scott. I think they're a really good team. They were a really good team in the old AA last year, so they have a chance to do this. I think a lot of Independence getting a 3 seed is contingent on that. But it doesn't hurt if Wheeling Central, that's playing a AAA this week, for AAA points, can lose to Shady Spring. Because Independence is only going to get single A points from Summers County. And meanwhile, if Wheeling Central beats Shady, you could have that same situation where the reason that's going to be difficult in AAA for Bridgeport to hang on to number 1 this week is because they play a AA in Lincoln. Meanwhile, Princeton's playing a quad A. Those points are probably going to be the difference in Princeton getting the number 1 seed. And then you bump it down to AA. That's a situation. So if I'm Independence, here's your rooting guide. Independence win, Scott win, Shady Spring win, just to be safe. and then you get a 3 seed, and you get the host. If you make it that far, you get to host 2 home playoff games guaranteed. And who knows what happens elsewhere in the bracket. You could host more. And I know that last year they went on the road and they get to play in Coal City, but you love to play the couple home playoff games in Coal City.
That's right. And a couple of Independence folks on Facebook talking about that. It's like going to hurt their heart just a little bit to have to root for Shady, but you got to do what you got to do, and that comes into play. But Shady's got a tough one, man. I mean, Wheeling Central, we know the pedigree, we know how good they are. That's going to be a tough game, and that'll be a hard one to win for sure. So we'll kind of see how it plays out, but that's get all 3 of those to fall that way is going to be probably a little tough.
Yeah, man, this next 6 days is going to be absolutely nuts. Like, from wrapping up that, probably getting some sort of decision on what's going to happen with the playoff ratings. Yep. Like I said, I fully expect that we're going to get an injunction and everything's going to be fouled up. So, yeah, I just anticipate that.
Because we saw right in the middle of the volleyball sectionals.
Yeah, exactly. The school dropped down in the middle of sectionals. Yeah. So what's going to happen is we're going to do all this. We're going to get the seedings and the ratings on Saturday. And they're going to go to Parkersburg on Sunday, do the film exchanges and the SSAC meeting. And then Monday, somebody's going to court to get an injunction. We should be hosting this playoff game, or we should be doing that. So then we're all sitting here waiting to figure out what we're going to do on Friday and Saturday, and then go from there. So it's going to be nuts. But some other action also. Volleyball regionals this coming week. A couple storylines that stand out to me is Wyoming East has a chance to make history. They have the opportunity to be the first team in program history to ever make it to the state tournament.
And Riverview, same thing.
And Riverview too, yeah. So there's a lot of history here. And that's really exciting, especially from those southern coal field communities. I know Wyoming East, they've been chalking at the bit. They just they reach out to us and they're like, volleyball. Like they just feed it. They're starved, so they're really excited for this opportunity, and I think it's very realistic. That said, I wouldn't overlook Liberty. I know that they beat them twice, but I thought Liberty gave James Monroe some matches, some battles, and I know that happens in volleyball. But the one takeaway that Liberty was taking away from that sectional loss is, hey, like we competed really well, and James Monroe is a really good team.
Yeah, especially we've seen it in the postseason time and time again. Teams expected to win, and it just gets a little tight, gets a little nervous. So these things can happen, and Liberty's going to kind of come in freewheeling. They probably feel like they have nothing to lose, and you still have to receive the ball. You still got to pass it, still got to set it, and you still got to get it down. So there's a lot of components to volleyball, and if you're off a little bit on just one or the other, and you start to struggle a little bit, the other team gets some confidence. Some different things can happen with that. But Wyoming East has been pretty excited this year. They were in the 3-class system. They were a AA, but they were a small AA. And, we're in the same region with Shady Spring and Hoover.
The number 2 and number 3 teams in AAA this year.
Right. So, they were 1-2 sections in a row. And, so they're a really good team, but, they just happened to run into a buzzsaw in the regional. So, they're pretty excited about this. You just want to see how excitement turns into how they play.
Yeah. So those are the double A's of Liberty at Wyoming East, West Side at James Monroe. In AAA, Shady will have the opportunity to clinch against Ripley. Greenbrier East has to go to Herbert Hoover.
Which is a dandy.
Yeah, and another tough one. They got to grind their way through that one.
Wish I was a little closer.
Yeah, and then in Quad A, we have Beckley trying to get by and get another state tournament trip, lock its way in.
They'll have St. Albans.
Yeah, and then in Single A, we talked about Riverview and Greenbrier West, which is the number 1 team in the state. Opportunities to get there and make some history, so it should be fun. And of course, last but not least, a rematch of the final. Was it final or was it penultimate?
The final regular season.
Final regular season. Okay, yeah, because the Huntington game was before the Wheeling Park. Yeah, okay. Yep. So Beckley will play Wheeling Park in the first round of the state soccer tournament on Thursday at noon.
Yep.
It should be lovely weather. Kind of go. Well, I have to check the weather. I know you probably have.
Should be pretty good.
Okay. That's good because usually it could be pretty frigid out there like that. I remember kind of going out there and like, man, it's like really cold out here. But we've had some nice weather, so hopefully it stays in there. These two teams played the last game of the regular season down here. It was a 2-1 Wheeling Park win. So and I think you actually caught that one. So kind of talk about this one and what you thought. And obviously, you have a preview up at lootpress.com right now that you guys can go look at as well. So talk to me about you saw that game, what your impressions were of this semifinal game, and as Beckley tries to finish the deal and win the state championship.
Very evenly matched game. I mean, it could go either way for both teams. Both teams have spent time at number 1 this year, and very deservingly so. Hurricane holds that honor right now and are the number 1 seed going in. But, this was going to come down to a couple of mistakes, and that's what the regular season game came down to. Wheeling Park made a mistake and Beckley capitalized. Beckley made a couple of mistakes and then Wheeling Park capitalized. They have one of the most dynamic scorers in the state, most dynamic players, and Trez McLeod. He's just, every time he cuts loose with the ball, if you're a Park fan, you're immediately on your feet expecting something good. If you're an opposing fan, you're holding your breath. It's like, what's he going to do? And, Beckley has plenty of scores too, but Beckley's a lot more distributed, as far as their scoring goes. So, it's a little bit of a clash of styles in a way, but, it should be a really interesting game. Beckley has a great back line, and they'll be tested, no doubt about it. Even when in the regular season match, the coach from Wheeling Park talked about, he was almost nervous after the game, because even though they'd won, he said, we've never had this basically before. Beckley possessed the ball. They were able to defend against us. And, Beckley hasn't allowed a goal in the postseason so far. So their defense is really good. And if that defense can maintain the level that it's been playing, then Beckley could pull this off. But this one wouldn't shock me if it goes to PKs. Wouldn't shock me.
And that's kind of been their calling card all season is defense, and it's defense travels.
Defense travels,
yeah. So but you don't have to travel; you get to play in your own house. What a special treat for Beckley.
Exactly.
I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Player of the Week winners. Player of the Week for the South is Will McGraw for Midland Trail. We talked about Brad Monster had a really good game as well. Kind of give the edge here to McGraw a little bit. A ton of yards, over 300, being able to double it in that situation against Greenbrier West defense, which is banged up, but they've been playing playoff games in that atmosphere for a while. Will had a great game, on offense and defense, just as Brad did. Just the tip of the cap to Will for what he was able to do completely all around. And like you said, Midland Trail, they could have went out soft, but they went through and they fought through this one and got a really convincing, nice victory.
Yeah, I think that's the key right there. Is we just wondered just how well would Midland Trail show up. With probably their playoff hopes not dashed, and would they come to play? And unfortunately, it was a game that that they probably needed 3 or 4 times during the season. And if they could have got that, they'd probably be in a whole different situation. But kudos to Will McGraw, good kid, and just a hard runner. And really good football player, so kudos to him.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to wrap things up for us. Do you have any final thoughts before we get into this crazy, hectic next week?
It's going to be wild. There's just so much going on, and so many scenarios as far as football, and then volleyball's going to be kicking in, and then soccer's very intriguing right now to see how that plays out. I know when I talked to Steve Monday night, he was ready to go. His last statement was, is it not Thursday yet? So, they're ready to play.
Absolutely. And, looking at it, it's the 5th. By the end of the month, we'll also have our basketball preview tabs out. So it's nonstop. We think we get a little bit of a break because of fall sports kind of tail off a little bit, but that's not necessarily the case here.
I was at the volleyball the other night, and Jen Irvin asked me, "Is like, do you not get a day off?" And I was like, "Day off? What's a day off?"
Yeah, that's one way or another. Even if we're not out and about, there's always something going on. Yeah, it's I talk about it even during the week during football season. I might not be out, but I'm sitting here trying to do statistics or working on this or preview or something like that. So
I watch more football on my computer screens than I do on my TV because I'm working and watching at the same time. So you sit at that desk a lot.
Yeah, there's always a lot going on. Well, let's go wrap things up. For my co-host Rusty Udy and our producer and editor Austin Sims, I'm Tyler Jackson. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back with you next week.